Well, over the last 3 weeks, I've shared with you what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And I've shared with you that making disciples for Jesus is God's purpose for your existence. It's God's purpose for your life once you become a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ. And I've shared with you how God develops your heart to make disciples. Last week we talked about how when you get saved, God calls you to make disciples. It's in your heart to make disciples. And then we talked about how God not only calls you to make disciples in your heart, but then you begin to grow and you discover these commands in His Word, like Matthew 28, 19 and 20 and 2 Timothy 2:2, where He commands you to make disciples of Jesus Christ. And that helps develop your heart to make disciples. And then we talked about how He wants you to be involved in a community of those who are really committed to make disciples for Jesus Christ, winning the lost and making disciples who will make disciples. And when you get into that community of disciples, it influences your heart. It affects your heart to want to make disciples. And so we talked about last week how God develops your heart to make disciples. This week, I want to share with you the importance of developing relationships to make disciples. Now, I want to ask you a question. I want to start out by asking you a question. And the question is this. There's all kinds of religious groups going throughout our neighborhoods, knocking on doors, trying to win converts. Let me ask you a question then. How do you feel? Just be honest. How do you feel when someone comes to your door to witness to you and they're from a particular religious group? When you open the door and there they are and you discover that they're from a certain religious group and they're trying to talk to you about their faith, what do you feel? Do you feel awkward? Like you don't even know who these people are, and they're trying to talk to you about one of the most meaningful things possibly in their life or your life? Do you feel somewhat threatened? Do you feel annoyed? Do you feel perhaps even irritated by the fact that they're taking your time and they're total strangers and you don't know them and they're trying to talk to you about their faith? Do you feel maybe a little bit suspicious? Like, what are they after? Do you feel like, in some instances, have you ever felt like you were a project and they were out there in the neighborhood doing their duty to their particular religious group and you were the object of their project? Did you perhaps feel like maybe they were trying to make a sale in some way, that you were dealing with a salesman? Did you feel loved? Now, why would you want to reproduce with others what creates such adverse feelings in you? But yet, when most believers think about evangelism, when they think about outreach, when they think about making disciples or winning the lost or reaching out to unbelievers, door-to-door evangelism is one of the things they think about. Or perhaps they think about an evangelist who brings a sermon to a multitude of people who don't know Jesus. And when they think of evangelism, they think about, that's what I'm supposed to do. You know, Jesus used a variety of methods to share His message with the lost and to make disciples. But the main method that Jesus used was developing or forming relationships with those who needed what He had to share. In fact, if you look at the ministry of Jesus, it's all about relationships. Look at the 12 disciples. You know, when He met those 12 disciples, He didn't immediately share with them all of the truths that they needed to hear to understand salvation. No, He formed relationship with those 12 men. And as He formed relationship with those 12 men, He shared vital truths that they needed to know about salvation. And then there's many stories in the Bible where Jesus met various people. And when He met them, you can see that His first goal was not to share all the truths with them that they needed to hear, but to form relationship with them. For example, there's a story of a man named Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus heard that Jesus was coming to his town. And Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus. And so he got up in a tree. Evidently, he was a shorter man. And he got up in a tree. And when Jesus was passing by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and he said, "Zacchaeus, come down." He said, "I'm going to go to your house today." And Zacchaeus came down, and Jesus went to his house to have dinner. Jesus' goal was not just to share the truths with Zacchaeus that Zacchaeus needed to hear. It was to form relationship with him. And what about the woman at the well? She had been married 5 times, and she was currently living with a man who wasn't her husband. I mean, if anyone deserved just to be rebuked when Jesus met them, knowing those things about her, it would have been this woman. But no, as the story unfolds, what you see Jesus doing is forming a relationship with this woman. You see, your first responsibility in making disciples is not to go out and just knock on the doors of strangers, or not to go out and pass out tracts to people, or not to go out and preach a sermon like a great evangelist would preach to a multitude of people. Your first responsibility in making disciples is to form relationships with those who need to hear the gospel. Now, my prayer for you tonight is that God will show you what relationships He wants you to form. In other words, that He will lead you by His Spirit to those individuals that He wants you to enter into relationship with, and then as you do that, share the truths of who Jesus is with them, and ultimately, the goal being lead them to Christ and lead them to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. So it's all about relationship.